Amen. As we're trying to understand this history, you may have noticed, if you haven't, let me just make this observation. We need to be really careful, because what we're actually doing is using repeat and enlarge to understand what 1844 looks like. Now, normally when we do repeat and enlarge, we go to various histories, and because we're so familiar with doing that, and perhaps because we know those histories well, it seems a relatively straightforward exercise. And most of us have probably just gathered that information because it's been handed down to us. The birth of Christ is a time of the end. The beginning of John's ministry is the formalization of the message. Its empowerment is when Jesus gets baptized, etc. So we've become quite familiar with that. And when we can use Spirit of Prophecy quotes to defend those assertions. But what we're doing now is we're trying to understand what at first sight seems relatively straightforward. We know if you go to Revelation 18, we've seen verses 1 to 3, then 4 to 5. And then if we went to early writings 277, we can build up a relatively straightforward model. But when we start probing into this and start looking at it in more detail, what we see is Ellen White takes this history, the one that she's paralleling, and repeats it over and over again. We've seen it in the Great Controversy, we've seen it in early writings 277, the loud cry, and we've seen it in the second angel, the Advent movement illustrated. Now we're going to look another illustration. You'll see that she repeats this history over and over again, and what we must be careful of is not to undo what we've already learned and understood and established, unless we've proven to be wrong, unless we've made a mistake. So I want us to always remember that as we go through this, that we don't get tripped up and throw everything away and try and think that what we're reading currently, the latest information, like that becomes the benchmark upon which everything else is defined or established. We have to be careful how we approach this subject. So we're going to go to another illustration. I don't know if we had a chance to review this. Obviously we didn't have a lot of time. Begins in 245 paragraph 2. So before we do that, let's summarize what passages we've looked at. We've looked at GC 611. We've looked at early writings 277 paragraphs 1 and 2. We've looked at early writings, the second angel's message. This is 240 paragraph 1 and onwards. Then we looked at early writings the Advent movement, and that was that 238. Yeah?
240 is Advent movement, then second angel is 238.
Oh, okay, I did it the other way. Thank you. So the second angel is 238, and the Advent movement is 240. So I've just given the first pages, and now we're looking at another illustration. And this is 245. So we're looking at a number of passages. You can see most of them are from early writings, where she wants to review this history over and over again. What we haven't done is look at William Miller or the First Angel's Message chapters. And neither have we gone to some of the other works like Story of Redemption, Spirit of Prophecy, those ones. Most of them are repeats. Story of Redemption is a repeat of another book anyway. So it begins, I saw the interest which all heaven had taken in the work going on upon the earth. This is pre-1798. Jesus commissioned the mighty angel to descend and warn the inhabitants of the earth to prepare for his second appearing. As the angel left the presence of Jesus in heaven, an exceeding bright and glorious light went before him. I was told that his mission was to lighten the earth with his glory. What's the problem straight away? What angel does that sound like? Sounds like Revelation 18, and this is one of the arguments that people have used in the movement to say that Revelation 18 verse 1 is the first angel, 18 verse 2 and 3 is the second, and verse 4 they would then say is the the third angel, first, second and third angel. It's because of passages like this. What do we do? What do we say? Because every time we've read an angel comes down, lightens the earth with his glory, we straight away say second angel. So how do we know when we go to 277 paragraph 1 that's not the first angel, it's the second? How do we know stuff like that?
277 what?
Right, it's 277, it says, and that a mighty angel was commissioned. It doesn't say, initially, it doesn't say Babylon is fallen, it says it lightened the earth with its glory, etc. If we just had that, how do we know what angel that is? Because it's Revelation 18, and this sounds like Revelation 18. So we have to, all I'm pointing out is that we have to be careful and contextualise what these messages are and how they're working. 277 is easy because it says when he came down he cried Babylon is fallen, so you know it's second angel's message. Are we okay with that this is the first angel? Are we okay that this is not Revelation 18? Yeah? Sorry? As the angel left the presence of Jesus in heaven, exceeding bright and glorious light rested before him. I was told his mission was to lighten the earth with his glory and warn man of the coming wrath of God. Multitudes received the light. Some of these seemed to be very solemn, while others were joyful and enraptured. All who received the light turned their faces toward heaven and glorified God. Though it was shed upon all, some merely came under its influence, but did not heartily receive it. Many were filled with great wrath. Ministers and people united with the violence stoutly resisted the light shed by the mighty angel, but all who received it withdrew from the world and were closely united one with another. Any thoughts about this in relation to the Advent movement illustrated when it comes to this first angel? What has she done? Sister Emma? She's combined them together. She's combined those two passages, those paragraphs that we read, and she's combined them together. Now, if we were going to make an argument, and we haven't thus far, to say that this history is Revelation 14, what would we normally say this history is? This is Revelation 10. And often what people will do is will take the imagery of Revelation 10 and parallel that with characteristics of Revelation 18, and they look identical or the same, and therefore that would be used as an argument to say Revelation 18 verse 1 is the first angel. You've either heard arguments like that or you've used them yourself. But we want to try and be true to the context, and it's about context that we have to be really careful of. So it seems to me, or I'm making the suggestion, that this angel that lightens the earth with his glory and warns man of the coming wrath, her focus is upon Revelation 10 where it's this glorious manifestation of the power of God that's being portrayed here. And we've already seen GC 611 that she parallels the glorious manifestation of the power of God 1840 to 44 with the angel that lightens the earth with his glory. If we're okay to make that connection. When we did this, we did 1840 with the Sunday law. We had this light. What we didn't do is go to 1840 and see where did that light even come from. We just said it was glorious manifestation of the power of God. We didn't go back into Revelation 10 and see that that glory was coming from that angel, and that angel is the first angel. We never did that, if you remember. But if we go to this passage, hopefully we can see that what's producing the glorious manifestation of the power of God is Revelation 10. It's that angel, if we are willing to do that. Any comment on that? Agreement, disagreement? So we add something, said something wrong, not portrayed it in a good way? Questions?
How do you know this is the first angel?
How do we know this is the first angel? So, first of all, we're going to use the structure of the book because it says another illustration. So if I asked you another illustration, what would you ask me? I said, this is another illustration, and what would your question be? Sorry? Someone gave the answer? The question would be of what? An illustration of what? So you have to go back and find an illustration of what, and then you go back to the chapter before that. It says the Advent movement illustrated. So this is another illustration. So you know this is repeat and enlarge. So based upon repeat and enlarge, you know it's in the same framework, or the context must be the same. And if you go to the Advent movement illustrated, it tells you that it's the first angel, then the second angel. And not only does it do that, if you go before that, it says, after William Miller, first angel, which is one chapter, the second angel, which is another chapter, then the Advent movement illustrated, repeat and enlarge. It's going to take those two previous chapters, first and second, and combine them. And then this one says another illustration, so you know it has to be talking about the first and second. That's the primary logic. So now we come to this passage, and the question is, how do we know this is the first angel? So it's a valid question. As we read, we'll see. I was showing the interest of which all heaven had taken in the work going on upon earth. Jesus commissioned a mighty angel to descend and warn the inhabitants of the earth to prepare for his second appearing. An angel left the presence of Jesus in heaven, and he had this glorious light. I was told that his mission was to lighten the earth with his glory and to warn men of the coming wrath of God. Which angel warns people of the coming wrath of God? Is it the first, second, or third? Some people are saying the third, which is why I said here the first angel's message is the third angel's message. It's just given a different context to it because it has all the same language. We know that this can't be the third angel. Why? Sorry? You can't have a third without the first and the second? So Alan White's going to tell us quite clearly, if you go back to the previous chapters, there is no third angel anywhere in that story. In fact, after this story, another illustration. What's the next subject? The sanctuary. And if we quickly read the sanctuary, I was shown the grievous disappointment of the people of God that they did not see Jesus at the expected time. They didn't know why their Saviour did not come, for they could see no evidence the prophetic time had not ended. Said the angel, has God's word failed? Has he failed to keep his promises? No. Jesus sent his angels to direct the minds of the disappointed ones to the most holy place where he had gone to cleanse the sanctuary and made special atonement for Israel. Jesus told the angels that all who found him would understand the work he was about to perform. Just So I'm going to go to the next chapter, the third angel's message. As the ministration of Jesus closed in the holy place, he passed into the holiest and stood before the ark containing the law of God. He sent another mighty angel with the third message to the world. So the first time you see the third angel's message is in October, which is the end of the Advent movement history. So when you come to another illustration and it sounds like to warn men of the coming wrath of God, it sounds like the third, but it is actually the first. Multitudes received the light. Some seemed to be very solemn, others were joyful. All who received the light turned their faces toward heaven and glorified God, though it was shed upon all. And the reason why I'm saying this is the first is if you parallel it to the previous chapter, you see the connecting links. That's why we know it's the first. Just want to point out, it says, it was shed upon all. When does that happen? When is it shed upon all? Remember, it's in between these two histories. Here it's only shed upon what we might call the elite, those who were previously having light. If you're in darkness, before 1798, you can't receive this message. Then it's afterwards everybody receives it. That's why I'm saying this is Revelation 10, the empowerment of the first angel. Satan and his angels were busy engaging and seeking to attract the minds of as many as possible from the light. The company who rejected it were left in darkness. I saw the angel of God watching with deepest interest his professed people to record the character which they developed as the message of heaven was presented to them. And as very many who professed love for Jesus turned from the heavenly message with scorn, derision and hatred, an angel with a parchment in his hand made the shameful record. All heaven was filled with indignation, and Jesus should thus be slighted by his professed followers. I saw the disappointment of the trusting ones, and as they did not see their Lord at the expected time. Where are we now? In 1844, the expected time, it had been God's purpose to conceal the future and to bring his people to a point of decision. Did God conceal the future? Did he deliberately make them come up with this misunderstanding of time?
It was God's purpose.
Sorry? It's God's purpose to trip up the Millerites. So he made Miller make the mistake.
No.
How did Miller make the mistake then? Sorry?
0 years.
I think like clinging to his own view.
To clinging to his own view. What's his view?
The earth is the sunflower, which God is going to create.
Why does that? Why does that change where they think when the Lord is coming? The date has got nothing to do with the event. They're two separate issues. You agree with that?
Yeah.
What's she talking about, the event or the date?
The date, the season.
Sorry? The date?
The date.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, so the date, that's not about location. It's because because Jesus didn't come, they know the date is wrong. But it said that it had been God's purpose to conceal the future and to bring his people to a point of decision. Without the preaching of definite time for the coming of Christ, the work designed of God would not have been accomplished. So it's talking about time. Why did they make a mistake on time? My brother?
They had not factored in the time that had elapsed from the going forth of the decree in Ezra 7.
Whose fault is that?
I think it's
Sorry?
I think it's their own fault.
Their own fault. So what does the Elohite mean? God concealed it, concealed the future, and to bring them to a point of decision. Who's getting the blame?
No.
I don't think it's God. I think they make the mistake, but God does not show them the mistake. He hides it so that He can prove them. So He reveals the mistake at a later date. So I think really it's their own fault.
So it's their own fault, they're making a mistake, and He says, I'm not going to tell you that you've made a mistake.
Yeah,
So God has to conceal the future and to bring His people to a point of decision. Any other thoughts to explain that? They make the mistake, and He says, I'm going to conceal. What about if they didn't make a mistake? Did they have to make the mistake? They do or they don't? They don't have to. If they don't have to make a mistake, then what sense does this make?
I believe it is God who suffered them to make a mistake.
What is it? What is the word suffered them?
He made Bilant make a mistake.
He made him to make the mistake.
Because his hand was over some of the figures. So Bilant could not see. that mistake was a test to them.
So God says, make him make a mistake, angels. Is that what you're saying? The reason why I'm asking the question is because it impacts us in all the mess ups that we've been doing over the years. Potentially the mess up that we might be doing now or might just come upon us. I want us to understand, how did that dynamic work? Whose fault was it? So that we can have at least some meaningful understanding of that. So you want to go with that? God said, you will make a mistake. Because when you said he suffereth, or he suffered him, I asked what that meant. You said made. Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, so you're going to hold that. My brother?
It was not God who made the mistake. It was the people, and it was their own fault.
So they made the mistake all by themselves. It's their fault. And what does it mean God concealed?
Then after they made that mistake, God kept quiet.
So you're saying what Sister Joy said?
It was not revealed to them.
So you make a mistake, he says, I can see what's going to happen and you're headed for disaster and I'm not going to tell you. Okay? And she says why? To test them, which is okay.
Use that opportunity to test the people.
Okay, so that's in agreement with what we read. I asked another question. What would have happened if they didn't get it wrong?
Still they were going to be disappointed because the event is going to be another thing for them.
So if they'd got it all right and they said 1844, then they would have still been disappointed. Yes. They just wouldn't have had two of them, they only would have had one. So all of this would have worked?
Because the second disappointment is going to come in the sense of the event. They are correct, but now they also still had another misunderstanding of the sanctuary. So disappointment was going to come.
So the first one is on time, not location, and the second one is on location, not time. And the Millerites failed both. Not everybody fails both. Some in
the time
in the spring everybody gets tripped up, they get disappointed, but not everybody fails the test. Some pass, some fail. In October, some pass, some fail, even though they all get disappointed. Everyone gets disappointed, but they don't all fail. Agree with you? Is that what you're saying? And so you're saying, if they got the date right, they still would have been disappointed, but it only would have been a singular disappointment, not two disappointments.
Actually, for me, what I'm seeing is that you have a part, Leader had a part to play, and God had a part to play. So because Leader played his part well, and God already had done his part. So for me, I think God conceding does not necessarily mean that God did show them the right they had to follow. He had already shown them, but they never went ahead to play their role, to understand that the light which was being given.
What was God's part?
To reveal to them the time and destiny.
What was their part?
Understand the message which is being given.
But he said God concealed.
Yes.
You just said God gave them.
Yeah, but when we shall read down there, they will say that even these angels who are brought in, who come in the power them, they are brought in to enable them to understand even the role of Christ who is going to move from the old to the most holy place. But they didn't understand that, and they had a second disappointment. Meaning that God is already giving them the light, not that them not going to disappoint them. But they are playing on something, them as them, which is hindering them from getting them, which God, from understanding the light, which already God is already providing that to them.
Did God give them light on the sanctuary?
He did. As we shall read down, you get my point.
Okay, I'll read that. Just one more question. When you said the Lord hid his hand over a mistake, what mistake is that? That he's hiding his hand over? The mistake on time or the mistake on location?
On location.
So he had the mistake on location, not on time.
I think time and location are both connected.
Time and location are both connected. In the spring of 44, when the prophecy fails, what did they say is the problem? Did they say the problem is geography or the problem is time?
Understanding that they have been using our own calendar.
Time.
Yeah.
So in October, when they have the same dynamic, what did they say the problem is? Time or geography?
So on October, I don't get it.
What do they say the problem is? Is the problem on the time or the location?
On October.
Yeah.
On October, what they didn't understand was what the message that they were carrying was Christ coming to cleanse the earth, or was the heaven, was it the
Location,
yeah.
where the sanctuary is. So there's two separate issues. I just want to ask you, when he had his hand over a mistake, what was the mistake that he was hiding?
It was about time.
Time,
Location.
not location.
Yeah.
Okay, so you. So my brother said that even if they got the time correct, this statement will still be true. Or maybe she would have had to adjust the statement slightly, but if it was true, they still would have been brought to a point of decision, a point of test. It says, without the preaching of definite time, would that statement change? If they'd got it all correct, would the preaching of definite time, as she says it, still been correct? Without the preaching of definite time for the coming of Christ, the work designed of God would not have been accomplished. Is that statement correct if they had never made the mistake on time? Just yes or no? Do you understand the question? Are you reading the sentence? Without the preaching of definite time for the coming of Christ, the work designed of God would not have been accomplished. What is she talking about in that sentence? She's talking about spring or October?
Spring.
What about if spring never existed? They had already said he's coming in October. Would this statement still be true? Someone said yes, and someone said no. Why would that sentence be wrong? Without the preaching of definite time for the coming of Christ, the work designed of God would not have been accomplished.
April 19th, they had their disappointment. It is the disappointment that led. It was the disappointment that led them to preach definite time.
They weren't preaching definite time before?
They were. They were preaching definite time before, but they preached it more prominently.
But they don't make a mistake in the spring. It never existed. They never made a mistake on time. Is the sentence still correct? Because that's his argument. They don't make a mistake in the spring. There is no spring disappointment. They come to October and they've been preaching definite time, because they were preaching definite time from 1842. You could argue from 1818. It's just a refinement of what definite time is. They go to the day and the hour, not just the year. But would that sentence still work? Sorry?
What do you think about it?
Sister Emma?
Yes, I think it would work.
Any development on that?
I was thinking, it's a separate thought, I suppose, but I was thinking how could Habakkuk and the parable of the 10 virgins have been, because it seemed like it was prophesying.
Sorry, what's the connection between Habakkuk and what?
Habakkuk and the parable of the 10 virgins, where they see the tarrying. And I was thinking, if it wasn't in God's order that they don't make this mistake in spring, how would you apply those? Because it seems like it's a prophesying that they have a tarrying, or that they're...
The way Ellen White applies it, on October 22nd, 1844. Okay, sorry. Rhetorical question.
I answered my own question by saying, okay, so they didn't have to make the spring one, you can still apply it, and that's what I'm saying, you can still apply it in October, but they were then saying, oh,
Speak slower and louder. Slower and louder.
So then I reasoned, okay, if they hadn't made the spring mistake, they would still have made the October mistake, and then those Habakkuk and parable would still be valid because of tarrying from October 44. So that it was prophesied that mistake, and this mistake wasn't meant to be. I don't know how you talk about the mistake in October, but the spring one doesn't have to be there because those parables could be fulfilled in October for those verses.
Any other comments?
Okay, it also reasoned like her, but another point that I would also need to add is that when they were preaching that Christ, that at the end of the 23rd day is putting it to be spring, they were still preaching that Christ was to come, and they were to be met with the same disappointment that they met in October. So the same disappointment that they met in October is the same thing that they were to meet in the spring, and therefore they could still be making such a mistake, though if spring was not there. And Revelation chapter 10 tells us that there was to be this bitter experience of the eating of the little book, so they could still be experiencing the same.
A bitter experience? Because we don't know all the details of what that bitter experience is. My question is, so that we remember, is if they don't make a mistake, does all this hold? Because what I want us to understand is why they make the mistake. We're going to go back to that. Why did they make the mistake? Because when it says he concealed things from them, we can build up a picture that God tripped them up and made them make the mistake on time. And some people are saying that he's not like that. Some people are saying maybe he is like that. But if they never made the mistake, would all of this still held? And I think it would. My brother, and then my brother.
So, I'm of the opinion that it will have helped because we see two preachings of definite time, and I'm looking at them as a cause and an effect. the preaching of definite time is what accomplishes God's purposes. So if we remove one preaching of definite time, which will be the Christian of April 19, we still have a preaching of definite time, and we still have therefore the effect that God's purpose will be accomplished. So I don't think it will have been necessary for them to make the mistake.
I acknowledge that this is talking about the spring, but if the spring never existed, it seems to me that the wording here would have still been the same and it would have worked.
I was also to comment on Sister Emma's point that I'm understanding it will still have been the same, but I see that they will not have been tested on time, but now on locations. The event that was to happen on October.
Yes, they would never have been tested on time, but it doesn't say here that they're actually being tested on time. I think all it says is it had been God's purpose to conceal the future and bring the people to a point of decision. Without the preaching of definite time for the coming of Christ, the work designed of God would not have been accomplished. It doesn't say they're actually being tested on definite time in the sense that you're going to get the date wrong. When it says the preaching of definite time was the test, I don't think he's talking about it from the spring disappointment in the way that we normally apply that. It seems to be a different way of expressing. If they had done what everyone was saying, Christ is going to come back sometime, we don't know when, they wouldn't have had a message. So what they're saying is the definite time message is we know when Christ is coming back, and that's what enlivened the people. And the enlivenment of the people, I just want to make one point. It's so obvious, we all know this. 1798 to 1844 is how many years? 46 years. All of our discussion is focused on a history from 40 to 44, which is how many years? 4 years. This is 10%. This is 90% of this history. And I think often we lose scale. We kind of put 1840 back here and zoom into the second angel's history. Millerite history, 90% of it before you get to is all done before you get to 1840, and we're talking about the last either 6 months or the last 3 months. You know, we're talking about something that you can't even see. It's like just over here when we talk about all of this history. So when it talks about definite time, it's this time period. They've been preaching for 42 years that Christ is about to return. Before you get to 1840, it's been a long time that this message has been developing and going forward. It's all about this time. Remember when we spoke about the midnight cry, the alarm and the true? When you see the scale, I think it puts it in perspective. The cry is just at the end, and the true cry is right at the very end. So I want us to remember the scale of this thing. Any more thoughts or comments about this?
Yeah, mine is my question. Because the preaching of a definite time and the mistake, if the mistake wasn't being made, how would the parable of Matthew 25, the telling time, and then Habakkuk 2, also the telling time there, how would it be fulfilled?
Go to go to Early Writings, page 55. Early Writings 55. As we're turning there, I want to make a comment which some of you may find provocative. When Ellen White says the parable of the 10 virgins will be fulfilled and has been fulfilled, I'm saying what she means is not what we say she means. We say she means this: 10 virgins, 10 virgins. And I'm saying I think, I'll be cautious, if you read what she's saying, she does not mean this. I don't believe this is a correct understanding of what Ellen White's saying. I think she's teaching this. And it's a big difference between the two. Does everybody understand that? This is Millerites. This is the 144. This is Millerites. And this is the SDA church. I don't know what you want to call it. The seventh church, the last church, Laodicea, from 1798 to the end of the world. This is how she's approaching that subject from my reading of what she does. I might be wrong, you may read it differently. Most teachers read it this way, we present it this way, and I'm not convinced that we're teaching it in the correct way. We're in Early Writings 55, that's just an aside. 55.1, it begins, I saw the Father rise from the throne, and in the flaming chariot going to the Holies of Holy. Where are we in the Holies of Holy? We call that the Most Holy. What waymark are we at? October 22nd. Then Jesus rose up from the throne, and most of those who were bowed down arose with him. So Jesus follows the Father. Skipping a sentence. Those who arose with Jesus kept their eyes fixed on him as he left the throne and led them out a little way. Then he raised up his right arm, and we heard his lovely voice saying, "Wait here, I am going to my Father to receive the kingdom. Keep your garments spotless, and in a little while I will return from the wedding and receive you to myself." So this is wedding language, and what do we say that's happening there? What's happening there when he goes from one place to another place? Change dispensation. And what dispensation are we now in? What's happening in the terms of the sanctuary? This is the investigative judgment. Are you okay? Investigative judgment. But he's done it in terms of the wedding. He says, wait here until I come back. When's he coming back? After the wedding. And the wedding, if we can do this, I'm not going to just put equals, I'm just going to put a wiggle equals, which means approximately. Sorry? This wedding is the investigative judgment. You okay with that? And after the investigative judgment, what's Christ going to do? He's going to come back. So after that is the second advent. If we're okay with that. So he says after the second advent happens after the investigative judgment. He says after the wedding I'm going to receive you. So that's also the second advent. Okay? So he says wait here till when? Till when? Which is? Okay, so he says wait here till the second advent. So tarry till the second advent. So when did the tarrying begin? So the tarrying begins here, and it goes all the way to the second advent. And what happens before you tarry? You leave home with your lamp and your oil, and you go to the bride's house, which is here, and then he says you're here and you wait. And what clothing are they wearing? It says
Spotless.
keep your garments spotless. So if it says spotless, what does spotless mean? Clean, without saying, it says keep it that way. So it means they must have already had the garment cleaned. So they've got a clean garment before this begins here. So they must have received their clean garments here. And so the clean garment, you said it's the wedding garment. I'm going to say it's not the wedding garment. I'm going to say it's the garments that the virgins have. Unless we're going to say they're wedding garments, which I'm not saying it's wrong, but I wanted to pick up they're the wedding garments of the virgins. Because the virgins are going to tarry here. So I think your question was, how will we then apply Matthew 25, and you said something else, I think. Habakkuk 2. Habakkuk 2 would be applied exactly the same way. The 1843 chart is here, and once the 1843 chart has done its work, they didn't notice that there was a tarrying time which begins here. And in fact, it's much more accurate to use it at this scale than the scale we use it at the Millerites, because you have two charts that are brought to view. And in this history, you don't have the two charts brought to view in the tarrying time. So I think it's even a much more accurate way of approaching it at this scale. So I think I'd agree with Sister Emma that all of those passages that the Millerites use for their own history, we can apply at this big scale, which is the scale that Ellen White wants to direct us to. It was okay at the Millerite scale, but this is the scale of Adventism. Thoughts?
In 246 paragraph 2, when she says that without the preaching of definite time for the coming of Christ, the work descent of God could not have been accomplished. The one I'm reading unto that is that now with the preaching of definite time, there is a work that God has sent which was accomplished. Is that correct?
Without the preaching of definite time, the work designed by God would not have been accomplished, yes.
So it means with the preaching of definite time, the work of God which he had designed was accomplished.
Yes.
Which was that work which the Lord had designed?
Are you asking me?
Yeah. All the class.
Preparation. What was the message that he gives the people? The one that when he gave to that angel, he said, here, take this message down and give it to them. What did the message he told them to give?
Fear God and give him glory.
Sorry?
Prepare for the second appearing.
To appear for the second appearing. We agree with that?
Yes.
You agree with that? You said yes? My brother? You said yes?
Yes.
I don't agree with that.
To whom?
I don't agree with you.
Why?
You tell me why you agree with Sister Joy.
Because from this paragraph, when you go up a bit, it says, Jesus commissioned a mighty angel to descend and warn the inhabitants of the earth to prepare for his second appearance.
Okay?
And so it's a message of warning. You want to say fear God?
So, you want to say, fear God, give glory to him for the hour of his judgment has come. That was the message that they had.
Is that what you want to say?
That's what someone else said. That's what that first angel's message is.
Yes.
And what judgment is that?
Investigative judgment.
That's the investigative judgment. So if we have said to the people, get ready, because in 46 years, Jesus is going to move from one place to another, and we know the date that it's going to happen, would that have produced a work, or would it have accomplished what God wanted to have happened? Would the people have prepared for that event if they had given it that way? You think so?
Yes.
You say no?
Yes.
It would have?
It could not have accomplished.
Why could it not have accomplished?
Because if they were to be given the definite time and they could have done their own things, they are waiting when it is almost tomorrow, then they pretend now they want to prepare. So God was testing them in every stage.
What you can see from this is that whether they make the mistake or whether they don't make the mistake, God was to test them. So we shouldn't just pivot ourselves and say...
We shouldn't do what?
We shouldn't just pivot ourselves on the point that they made a mistake, then the test was initiated. Whether they, even if they didn't make the mistake.
I don't know anybody who's saying that they make the mistake and then the test is initiated. I don't think anybody said that.
Okay. What the point I'm trying to say is that even if there was no mistake, these messages were going to test them.
Would they have made the proper preparation without the preaching of definite time? Because that's what her sentence is dealing with.
Because how can you prepare when you don't know definite?
What was the definite time on in real life? The genuine definite time. What was the definite time on?
They preached the coming of the second coming of the Lord.
And was that right or wrong?
It was wrong.
So that's what people have said. It's wrong that they preach definite time on the second advent, because they can preach definite time on what? On the investigative judgment. So the question is, if they had preached definite time on the investigative judgment, would it have produced the effect that God wanted it to produce? That people would be prepared and get ready for it, because they would have been so scared not to. Because what they've done is they've got two messages mixed together. When it says that it says Jesus commissioned a mighty angel to descend and warn the inhabitants to prepare for his second appearing. So they took that aspect, let's prepare for his second coming, and they combined it with another aspect of how you actually prepare. How do you actually prepare for his second advent? How do you prepare for his second advent? You realise that in 46 years what's about to happen? No. Then in 46 years you're going to begin to be investigated. That's what the preparation you're supposed to make. But if they had given that message, nobody would have listened to them. You've been in this movement for a while, yeah? And what do you preach about Sunday law? Why do you preach that when you know the close of probation is Daniel 12:1, not 11:41? So you trick the people saying we'll move 12:1 to 11:41 so that you can scare them enough to do something. What should you be telling people?
The judgment, investigative judgment of the living.
So you're saying, let's prepare for the Sunday law. And what's going to happen at the Sunday law? You can be prepared for the second advent. Why don't you teach them that? Why don't you teach them let's get ready, the Sunday law is coming. It's coming in 5 years' time, and when it comes, then you need to prepare for the second advent. Why don't you teach them that? Sorry?
Misconception of what we are supposed to do.
You've got the misconception. I don't think it is. I think because if you taught them that, who would listen to you? What does our church teach? It says, when you get to the second advent, what are you supposed to do? Prepare for the second advent. Are they wrong? Because we say these people are apostates. They reckon they're going to get ready after the Sunday law. Isn't that exactly the dynamic of what the Millerites were supposed to do? October 22nd, 1844, investigated judgment. Now you can get ready for second coming. I'm saying 63, but it's going to happen soon. It's exactly the same dynamic, and what they do is they manipulate their message. Why? Because they want to take love out and they want to introduce fear. Bob Edwards' book. Sorry, don't worry. And we do the same. We take the message of love out and we want to give a message of fear. And isn't that what we get accused of? And we say, no, our message is full of love. Which is a lie, isn't it? Because if it was full of love, we'd give it as God said. Tell them, Sunday law's coming, then you prepare. Because the judgment of the living's happening, you prepare, because I'm coming soon. That's a loving message. But we say, if we gave them that message, no one would listen to us. So we'll kind of do our own thing, and we'll tell them, call it close of probation, like our forefathers did, because it works for them, it'll work for us. Yeah? The Millerites, our forefathers, they said we'll change October, call it close of probation, so we'll copy them. It produced fear. What was the end result of all their fear? All of their message, all of their manipulation of what they were supposed to do. 50 people made it. And they had 50,000. 200,000, someone said. Did you say 200,000? We're doing all of this stuff. How many people do you think are going to survive what we think is a great, glorious message? 50. Whatever the number is. It's the boy. Very few people are going to make it because we think we know better than God. Just want us to think about that. Okay, we digressed. I want to come back to this passage. So, I'm suggesting, and there are enough of us who have suggested this, so I want to say this is what we should all be listening. No, we should all be accepting this. This is correct. That even if they didn't make the spring mistake, all of this works. The message of definite time produces an effect because it brings fear into people. And this fear is because they have an inbuilt mistake into their message, which is not the time element, which is the location element. So they have that inbuilt one, and it makes them change their message. What we need to grapple with is, have we made any mistakes? No. Do we understand about time? Yes. Do we understand about location? Yes. So what we're doing is, we're taking the Millerite history, and even though I'm saying that we've made this mistake for a long time, called Sunday law close of probation, it is not close of probation. We know that. It's the time of preparation. We know all of that, but we'll still call it close of probation to scare people, if we want to go with that. But what I'm saying is that we do know all the intricacies of the mistakes that they've made. We're not repeating their mistakes. We're not going into this blind. The other thing I want us that I want us to see, that definite time accomplishes something, and that's why we said the third angel's message is first is the third, and it's all related to time.
So you are saying that son-in-law is not the close of probation?
It's not that straightforward. In the scale of the 144,000, it's not the close of probation, it's Daniel 12:1. But everything that the Millerites taught, I think, if I believe in testimony of two things is established, everything that they taught is correct. ends up being correct, which was wrong for them. Does that make sense? So what was wrong for them, close of probation, becomes right for us. So it's legitimate and correct for us to say close of probation, but it's also correct for us to say it's not close of probation. It's both. It is and it is not. And that's what we have to explain. And how do we explain that? Using... I was going to say using fractals. If we use fractals, we can explain that. Because fractals are going to show us various groups. And the Millerites aren't dealing with that logic. They don't have this concept of various groups. They just have one entity.
Okay, I think...
okay, you're confused.
Daniel chapter 11, verse
11:41.
That's where we normally start, and Sunday morning is close of probation. And I think particularly in dealing with the SDA church.
With the?
SDA church.
It's fractals.
My brother?
Okay, I was thinking that...
Oh, when he does that, 11:41, many countries shall be overthrown. Countries is supplied word, so many shall be overthrown. He's saying that's all the Adventists are overthrown.
So, I was...
one second. That's what you're saying, many Adventists were overthrown? Okay, I disagree with that. Just so that you know.
Okay, so I was thinking when you were saying that the message the Millers were supposed to give is prepare. Investigate judgment is beginning. So when you said in our history, what we should be telling the people is that prepare, judgment of the living is beginning. And Sunday Lord will prepare for another period in front of you. So in my mind I was thinking, who is this are we telling that? I was thinking it's the 144,000.
So it's all about scale. So if you want to, did everybody see what he said? He said the 144,000, that's the target audience. We've got multiple target audiences. You don't say that to who?
Levites.
You don't say that to a Levite. You don't say that to a priest. You don't say that to a Nethinim. If you said that to them, it would be a death sentence. Why? Sister Sarah? It's too late. If we go to 11:41, 11:41, is it a verse in a sequence of verses? This brother, yes? Where does it begin? The verse. Where does it end?
45.
Where does it end? Don't help him. Where does it end? It's not 45. Someone go to the next chapter, and I think it's the first word, verse 1. Read the word to him.
And that time.
3 words then. And? Okay, 3 words. At that time. What time?
The time from 41, 40 to 40.
Okay, so the story begins at what verse?
40.
And ends?
12:1.
12:1. What scale is that from 1989 to the second advent? What scale is that in those 4 groups? These 4 groups, which scale are we at?
Number 4.
We're at number 4 scale. You're okay with number 4 scale? So, if you agreed with what Brother Robert said, he said, if you're talking about scale number 4, then the message to this group is what? Repeat what you said.
Prepare for investigation of the living.
When?
On Sunday.
So the message for the 144,000 is, prepare now, because at the Sunday law, it's not your close of probation, it's time for the investigative judgment. Are you okay with that? Yeah? Have we run out of time? Okay, so if we try and remember this for tomorrow, because it'll take 10-15 minutes to go through that logic. Try and remember where we've got to today, and hopefully we can pick it up, and hopefully I'll remember. I want to finish.
Yeah, just one point. if I was keen, this is just another point. If you are keen in that paragraph, it says that Satan was leading men's minds not to concentrate on the events connected with preparation and the end of profession. And like he was suggesting that these guys, they were not focusing on the events which were near, they were only focusing on the events which were far off, like the close of profession is far.
No, I'm stopping. That's not a quick point, because I want to understand what you're talking about, the passage. That's not a quick point. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we give you praise and thanks for your goodness and your mercy. Help us, Lord, to honour and glorify you in all that we do and all that we say. We ask a special blessing upon the food that we're to eat, and pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.